All right, jumping on YouTube here because I wanted to weigh in on the end of the Philadelphia 76ers season. Apologies for the use of this camera. Had some technical difficulties with the other camera that's behind my laptop here. But I did want to weigh in on a topic that has become a front burner one on Monday after the Philadelphia 76ers had another disappointing finish to their season. For the fifth time in the last 6 years, the Sixers season ends in the second round. For the third time in the last 6 years, it is the Boston Celtics eliminating Philadelphia. This was a close game, game seven at halftime, and it was a laugher in the second half after the Celtics went on a 33-10 run in that third quarter. Joel Embiid was awful. James Harden was awful. Jason Tatum was great. 51 points in game seven. You know, if you tack that on to the 16 he had in the fourth quarter of game six, that's 67 points over 5 quarters for Jason Tatum. So a remarkable performance by the Celtics star. And we're going to talk more down the line about the Celtics, what they showed in the series and what they've got moving forward. But I want to stick with Philadelphia for the purposes of this video. The Sixers are at a crossroads. There was no team going into the playoffs that had more pressure on it than the Philadelphia 76ers. Doc Rivers faced pressure. James Harden faced pressure. Joel Embiid faced pressure. And now they have to deal with the consequences of it. This was arguably the worst loss of the Embiid era because they had a 3-2 lead going into game six. They had opportunities to win game six in the fourth quarter, and they blew it. And then they come out of the locker room at halftime of game seven with zero energy, zero effort, and were just run off the floor. So let's address the three key pieces to this puzzle and their futures moving forward in Philadelphia. Now, Embiid's easy, not going anywhere. 29 years old, reigning MVP. Despite the fact that he struggled in game seven, he is still one of the singular dominant forces on both ends of the floor that the NBA has today. And this is not to give Joel Embiid a pass, but he did suffer a significant injury at the end of the first round against Brooklyn, an injury so significant that he missed game one of this series against the Celtics. He then, in game seven, seemed to re-aggravate that injury when he stepped on the foot of Marcus Smart, or stepped on the chest, I guess, of Marcus Smart in the first half of game seven, and never quite looked the same for the rest of it. So, look, blame Joel Embiid for his performance, but take into account the fact that he was battling what probably was a pretty significant knee injury. Either way, he's back in Philadelphia next season. He is the face of the franchise. He is the tentpole player. You build teams around Joel Embiid. You do not trade players like Joel Embiid. So Embiid will be back. Doc Rivers. I think it's going to get interesting. There'll be some interesting conversations inside the walls of the Philadelphia front offices over the next couple of days. Doc Rivers has 2 years left on his contract, so contractually, he's locked in. But for this team to fail once again, look, we've seen coaches fired for less. We've seen championship coaches. Mike Budenholzer won a championship 2 years ago, fired after a first-round loss, a series that he played basically 3 games without Giannis Antetokounmpo. Monty Williams, last year, coach of the year, 2 years before this, NBA Finals, canned in Phoenix. So it would not be shocking to see Doc Rivers let go. And I thought some of the comments made about Doc Rivers were interesting after the game. You saw Joel Embiid offer his support for Doc Rivers, saying he's done a fantastic job, but he also added, "I'm glad I don't make those decisions." James Harden offered virtually no support for Doc Rivers. I was standing in the visiting locker room when Harden was asked point blank, what is your relationship like with Doc Rivers, and do you want to see him return? And his response was, and I think effectively quoting here, the relationship is okay. Okay. And that was it. Walked away after answering that question. So it's safe to assume that there's some friction right now between Doc Rivers and James Harden. And that may be too much for Doc to overcome, especially if James Harden is back in Philadelphia. And that brings us to the last piece of this puzzle. And that's the most important piece, I think, to this puzzle. And that's James Harden. James Harden showed in this series two things. One, he can still be one of the most dominant players in the NBA who can carry a playoff team to wins. He did that in game 1 when he had 45 points. He helped do that in game 4 when he had 42 points on 70% shooting, and helped that team win an overtime game that kept them in the mix. So James Harden showed a lot on the positive side, but on the negative side, these last couple of games, he was awful. 3 for 11 from the floor in game 7. The last 2 games from three-point range, he was 1 for 11. He had 9 points in game 7. Can't have that. You can't have a guy making $35, $40 million per year putting up those kind of numbers. Now, James Harden is a player option for next year. If he picks up that option, that's it. He's back with the 76ers next season. If he doesn't, though, it is going to be a very, very tough call for Philadelphia because I don't think you can pay James Harden $35 to $40 million annually over a 3 or a 4-year deal. I just don't see how you do it. Because the second you sign James Harden to that type of contract, it becomes the most untradeable contract in the NBA. James Harden at the start of next season is going to be 34 years old. He has already shown some signs of decline. It's likely he's going to continue to decline over the next couple of years. How can you justify paying Harden that kind of money? I know Daryl Morey, the GM in Philadelphia, is loyal to Harden. He brought him into Houston. They had some good years together. Then he brings him into Philadelphia. And I know the Sixers paid a premium to get James Harden out of Brooklyn and into a Sixers uniform. But what have they accomplished? They got beat in the second round last year. They got beat in the second round this year. It's not going to get any easier next season. The Celtics are still going to be there. The Bucks are still going to be there. Other teams are coming. How do you bring James Harden back on a long-term deal? My initial thought was that the Sixers, if it comes to it and James Harden wants a multi-year contract at that type of dollar figure, you got to let him go. And there are basketball reasons to let him go. Tyrese Maxey is a stud. Tyrese Maxey is going to be a big-time player in this league. Having the ball in Tyrese Maxey's hands more is probably a good thing. You've got Tobias Harris, who was kind of a no-show in this series as well, but he's got a contract that you can trade, and you can use that contract and maybe one or two of your young pieces to get another player, another ball handler, another playmaker on the roster to be that third guy with Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And look, history has shown you don't need multiple superstars in this league to achieve at the highest level. The Bucks just won a title a couple of years ago with Giannis and some very good supporting role players. Tyrese Maxey, in my opinion, is on the level or will be on the level of Jrue Holiday or Chris Middleton. You just need to find one more of those guys or maybe two guys that equal that guy to put into that mix, and you can be right back at the championship level. But my takeaway with James Harden is if he wants a big contract, if he wants a max contract, which is $200 million over the next 4 years, you can't do it. You got to say goodbye. You got to let him go. Maybe it's Houston, maybe it's somewhere else, but I don't think you can bring James Harden back on that type of contract. So, big decisions coming in Philadelphia. Joel Embiid, that's a no-brainer. Doc Rivers, there's going to be some discussion. And if James Harden opts out, I think Philadelphia has to know what its limits are and has to know when to walk away.